Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Brody Cass Talbot with Bird Alliance of Oregon, and really excited to have so many folks showing up to learn how you can help protect wildlife. The webinar tonight is on 1% for wildlife, and we've got our all-star crew of staff here at Bird Alliance of Oregon to tell you all about how to do that. I think that this is a really exciting opportunity to make a really profound contribution to how we conserve wildlife in the state. And one of the things I think is most exciting about it is that uh, when this bill gets over the finish line, it will be because of the actions of folks like you who are standing up and getting involved and stepping up. And so, really excited that we can work together to make this happen. Um, a few bits of housekeeping as we go through the night. This is a webinar function. So what that means is that you don't have audio or video and you can't even turn it on accidentally. So feel free to uh, eat dinner in your jammies if you would like as we go through. Other bits of information, if you've got a technical issue or something you want to share in the chat, I'll be monitoring the chat. I'll also be adding some links to some of the things that we're going to be talking about. And we'll also have a Q&A session at the very end. So if you want to put questions in the Q&A, just know that we'll wait until the very end of the evening, not end of the evening, but hopefully about 45 minutes from now, we'll get into the Q&A session. We expect this will all told be about an hour. So just let me know if you're having any technical issues or you're having a hard time hearing anybody. Um, and with that, let's jump right in. The things we're going to be talking about tonight, we're going to start with a wildlife quiz to keep it kind of fun and interesting for you. There might be some tricky ones in there. After that, we're going to hear from Joe Liebezeit, our statewide conservation director, who's going to give us some background on this bill. This bill, it has a new name as of last year, but it's something that Bird Alliance of Oregon and the conservation community have been working at for a long time. So he'll give you a lot of the background as well as what's in the bill and why it's so important. After that, we'll hear from Travis Coons, our Wildlife Care Center director, who's going to be telling us about how this could impact wildlife hospitals across the state positively. And then, very importantly, at the end, we'll have Carly Chin joining us to tell us how you can get involved and how you can make sure that your voice is heard on this issue. And I just want to start with a quick background on who we all are. We all work for Bird Alliance of Oregon, which has been around in Oregon since 1902, working to conserve Oregon's wildlife and birds and the habitats that they depend on. And so this is, yeah, part of a long legacy for us to try and protect these important creatures. And with that, I think we should jump right into the wildlife quiz. The way that's going to work, I'm going to show you an image of an animal here in Oregon, and you should be able to make your guess. I'll make it multiple choice to make it easier for you. And if you're watching the recording, don't worry, you can just yell your guess at the screen, and we'll go over them all together at the very end. And give me 1 second to bring that up. Oops. There's our first one. You're getting an extra moment here to try and guess. All right, so you should have the quiz now in front of you, and we're going to look at 8 animals across Oregon really quickly. Hopefully, you should be able to move that around if you're able to. Our first creature of the night is one of the perhaps cutest animals in Oregon. It is a legomorph. If you know your taxonomy, that might be a hint for you. Lives pretty much exclusively in scree fields, pretty much exclusively in mountains, although we do have the world's lowest elevation population here in Oregon. And they spend the summer gathering all of this vegetation that they then will eat for the rest of the year while they're uh, hiding underneath these rocks. So they're often more heard than seen. And we've got some great guesses coming in so far. Looks like folks are just getting their guesses in, so I'll give you an extra second. People might have been blinded by the cuteness for the first few minutes. All right, we'll move on to our second animal of the evening. Our second bird is a grassland specialist, uh, and so requires pretty high quality grassland during the breeding season to breed here. These birds breed in Eastern Oregon, and we get wintering birds throughout the state in the winter. They can be long ranging, they'll move en masse in response to prey availability, and they hunt on the wing while they're flying, very similar to northern harriers. So, anywhere you see a northern harrier, there's an opportunity for this bird to be there as well. And you should be able to scroll down on your quiz to go to the second question. Oh, right. You may have clicked submit, which would end the quiz for you. A question from Emily. So good question, but I can fix that real quick and we can go through. Um, Give me 1 second, and if anyone else did that, now you can go back through and you can answer all the questions and click submit at the very end. I apologize for any technical difficulties. They've changed their quiz function a little bit. On to our third piece of wildlife, our third animal, another very cute mammal. There are multiple populations and subspecies of this mustelid. As cute as it is, it's a ferocious predator, as is true of maybe all mustelids. Um, and yeah, they're one of the most endangered populations is found on the southern Oregon coast. And these animals are known for being able to burrow under the snow for long distances. Here's our fourth entry for the wildlife quiz. This is a butterfly. Obviously, this is one of two Oregon butterflies that is listed as threatened or endangered at the state level, and it's restricted to grassy habitats near the Oregon coast. The caterpillars feed on only one food source, one plant, which is the early blue violet. So there's been a lot of work in Oregon to try and protect these habitats. Those violets only grow in these open, high quality grasslands. So a lot of work done to try and protect those plants and then the butterflies themselves. Our next one is a fish, one of five salmon that we have in Oregon. And these fish are like most salmon, they're silver when they're out at sea, but when they come back into their rivers to spawn, they turn this incredible reddish color and they grow this hooked upper mandible, one of our endangered species of salmon that we have here in Oregon. Next up, we have a shorebird. This is one of our wetland breeding birds, specifically out east of the Cascades, and one of our larger shorebirds with an incredible bill, and they turn this beautiful breeding color of orange in the summer, and always a thrill to go out to our eastern wetlands to try and find these large shorebirds. All right, folks, we're over halfway. Our next species for the quiz is perhaps well known to a lot of folks in Portland. This is the species that the frog ferry was created for to help these frogs get across Highway 30, where they've had a lot of wildlife collisions. Wildlife collisions are one of the things that we're hoping to address, help with in this bill. And so this is a frog that spends most of its time in forest, where it forages throughout the year and then returns to wetlands in the winter to breed. And so that's the frog fairy is happening now, especially with these rainy nights and these warm rainy nights, which is what they need to breed. And oops, my apologies. Our last bird of the day. This bird is probably most well known as a coastal species. So folks love seeing them at Haystack Rock. And um, and this is the male. However, they breed on mountain streams, so fast-flowing mountain streams and rivers, making them a somewhat unique animal that are said to suffer more broken bones than any bird that we have because they spend their breeding season in whitewater rivers and then their wintering season in nearshore intertidal rocky habitat, and just incredible birds. And it looks like we've got some really great guesses so far. And I'm just going to let that go for one more minute as I'm starting to see all of the votes coming in. And so our last question, of course, was what do all of these animals have in common? And I think you all got that correct, which is that they are among Oregon's 321 species of greatest conservation need. It's a long list. It spans all sorts of different animals, from mammals to amphibians to birds to invertebrates, insects, as well as plants. And we'll get to learn a lot more about that from Joe. And great job, folks. I love that somebody went for bowling pin goose. I appreciate that. Uh, yes, thank you. Bye, Bob. I appreciate that. Um, and just for the folks playing at home, on the upper left, we of course have American pika. Number two was short-eared owl. Number three is our Pacific martin. Number four is the Oregon silver spot butterfly. Number five is coho salmon. Number six is the American avocet. Number seven is the red-legged frog, and number eight is the harlequin duck. So great job. Thanks for playing along. And if anybody got all of those correct, let me know about it in the chat. With that, I would like to turn it over to Joe Liebezeit, who is, again, our statewide conservation director, to tell us a little bit more about this bill, what it does, and why it's so important. Joe?
Thanks, Brody. Appreciate the quiz. That was fun. So yeah, I'm going to dive into what this bill 1% for Wildlife is all about. So why don't you go ahead to the next slide? So here's the bill. Here's the effort in a nutshell. 1% for Wildlife would be legislation to increase the state transient lodging tax from 1.5% to 2.75%. So it'd be a 1.25% increase. And for those of you who don't know what the transient lodging tax is, it's basically a fee when you go and you stay at a hotel or a motel or an Airbnb. It's a little bit of a fee on there to provide revenue. And if we did get this bill passed, we would generate about 35 to 40 million dollars per year that would go towards wildlife conservation and would help protect those species that Brody went through, plus 300 plus more. So go ahead to the next slide. So there's a lot on the slide, but I wanted to provide detail on specifically what this would fund. So the first thing you could see, the first line is kind of the big ticket item. It would fund the implementation of the State Wildlife Action Plan, which I'm going to talk a bit more about in a subsequent slide. We call it for shorthand the SWAP, which was developed by Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, but had a lot of input from experts and even from people in the bird alliance world when they had public comment on review of this plan. So 1% of that tax would generate about $30 million to help us protect those 300 plus species. It would set up a Recovering Oregon's Wildlife Fund um, in Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. The next one down is anti-poaching enforcement. There would be about 1.5 million generated a year for Oregon State Police to do anti-poaching enforcement from everywhere from the coast all the way through Eastern Oregon. There's also some money in there that would pay ranchers for loss of livestock due to wolf predation. And to give you a little bit of background on this bill, some of these items were included in the bill when we tried for this bill last session. And part of it was a negotiation with other members, folks in the legislature that we wanted to have be supportive of this bill. And in this case, this was really helpful for getting some bipartisan support, some from Republican support. The next item down there is the Oregon Conservation Recreation Fund, which would generate about $1.5 million a year. And it provides grants, small grants for different groups, NGOs, tribes, and others to do conservation related work. And I should just emphasize those yellow highlights in the comment. Those represent how the money from this would directly benefit the Bird Alliance of Oregon. So, grants for through the Oregon Conservation Recreation Fund, we already get some of those. We already have a couple of grants for funding, for example, our snowy plover work on the coast and in Eastern Oregon, some of our work there. Um, I have the Recovering Oregon's Wildlife Fund highlighted too up there on the first row because, it really hits to the core of the mission of the Bird Alliance of Oregon to protect wildlife and habitats in Oregon, and that's what supporting the State Wildlife Action Plan would do. Um, Skipping back down to the fifth row, wildlife connectivity efforts. A portion of the uh, revenue would also support habitat restoration in key wildlife corridors. And this would be done primarily through Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. There have been other bills and other efforts to work to try to get, actual infrastructure in place, so like crossings for wildlife. That is more in the purview of Oregon Department of Transportation. But for this particular bill, it would be more about habitat restoration in these wildlife corridors. And then there's the Wildlife Stewardship Program with ODFW. Um, yeah, I see the last row is not visible. I'll talk about that. But yeah, Wildlife Stewardship Program would generate about $600,000 a year, and that would set up a program at Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife to allow us to work to resolve kind of human wildlife interactions and conflicts around the state. It also would set up a wildlife rehab grant fund. And again, that could definitely benefit our organization, Bird Alliance of Oregon, since we have a wildlife care center. And I am going to let Travis, who's going to speak after me, talk more about that. And then finally, there's some money for invasive species control, and also a bit of anti-poaching money that was more for directed towards the Department of Justice. So that's a really, really quick overview of what those funds would go towards. So again, really, the top line is the big ticket item, but a lot of these funds would really benefit wildlife and conservation in Oregon for many years to come. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So why do we need this right now? Well, I think most of you know we're on this call where our world is in a biodiversity crisis right now. Many species of many different taxa all over the world are declining and going extinct. And in North America, a good example I have displayed here is A recent study from 2019 that indicated that over 3 billion of our avifauna, our birds, have been lost since 1970, which is really shocking and startling. And in a more recent report in 2022, the State of the Birds report, there's a figure from that which shows the zero indicates like no population decline, and everything below that zero, which is on the y-axis of that graph, is our birds that are declining. So you can see in most habitats, birds are in decline overall. But you see above the zero, there's a few types of birds that are doing pretty well. Dabbling diving ducks, water birds, for example, birds associated more with some of our wetland habitats. And the reason for that is that there has been money available to do conservation for these different groups of birds. So it's just a testament that if we have the money, we have the resources to do conservation, we can actually turn population trends around and have wildlife increase. Go ahead to the next slide. So I'm going to go back to that state wildlife action plan, which again is that the big ticket item that most of the funds would go towards. So basically the state wildlife action plan is a roadmap to address this biodiversity crisis that we have in Oregon. Some of you may be more familiar with the state wildlife action plan as the Oregon Conservation Strategy. It was named that until last year when Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife updated the plan and renamed it the State Wildlife Action Plan. So it's under revision, but it's pretty much done. It just needs to go through federal review. And again, it identifies those 300 plus species that are at risk in our state. And the goal of the State Wildlife Action Plan is, pretty succinct there. Maintain healthy fish and wildlife populations by maintaining and restoring functional habitat to prevent and reverse declines. And again, there's no dedicated funding source to implement this plan. There's pieces of money here and there that help us do a little bit, but not anything real dedicated like we need. Go ahead, Brody. Next slide. So the State Wildlife Action Plan has identified kind of two groupings of species, species of greatest conservation need. Now, those are, again, those species that are most at risk of decline and extinction. And there's 320 of those identified. We call them the SGCN species. All the pictures that you see there are SGN species. Um, Species of greatest information need are those that are not necessarily declining at this time, but they're thought to be in trouble, but we just don't have enough information on them. There's 176 SGIN species. And then finally, the State Wildlife Action Plan also identifies different habitats that are really struggling in our state that we need to invest more in to protect and restore. A couple I've mentioned here, estuaries, oak woodlands, and sagebrush habitats. And some of these habitats are really central to the work that Bird Alliance of Oregon does throughout the state. So go ahead to the next slide. So who supports 1% for wildlife? Well, as I mentioned, this bill had been in play in previous legislative session, and it's going to come right back in the next legislative session in a month or a couple months from now. Um, but we've been able to pull together a really diverse group of organizations. And Brody, I'm going to have you tap on just one tap on the slide. So, there's us, Bird Alliance, NGO group, of course, we're supportive. Another group you can see in that is the Oregon Hunters Association up there. And tap one more, Brody. And then, for example, we've gotten some of the fish groups, the conservation fish groups, to support this. We even have like groups like the Oregon Trappers Association that are supportive of this effort because these very different groups really understand that we need this support to support our wildlife. And also, we have support from the outdoor recreation and tourism industry. We're working right now to get businesses to support this bill. We've got over 40 businesses currently supporting the bill. And if you know of any businesses, please let us know that you think might support it. Places like breweries or hotels or restaurants. Those are the types of places that we're looking to get support for the bill. And as I mentioned before, it's a bipartisan bill. It has both Republican and Democratic support. And finally, there have been surveys done throughout Oregon to gauge Oregonians' interests and what their priorities are for our environment. And more than 70% of the people surveyed believe that protecting biodiversity should be a priority. Go ahead to the next slide. Now, there are some groups that oppose 1% for wildlife, and the two main groups are Travel Oregon and Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association. And they just don't want to see any increase in expenditures for hotels. They feel like it could affect the revenue generated for the travel industry and for tourism. Go ahead to the next slide. But, what we see is actually 1% for wildlife is good economic policy. And, I have a couple points here I'm going to go through. So first of all, over $20 billion a year is generated from the economic output from outdoor recreation spending. This is an estimate from 2022. And 2 billion of that is just solely for nature tourism and wildlife viewing and things like that. So it's a really important source of money for Oregon's economy. And, we need to take care of these places. If we don't have healthy wildlife populations, if we don't have healthy habitats, then people are not going to come to Oregon anymore to enjoy these things. It also supports the second bullet point down here, almost 200,000 jobs, generating, a lot of money in wages for people. So, if we have healthy habitats and wildlife, for the tourism industry, we're going to be able to keep supporting jobs. Um, and we know it's a tax bill. A lot of people don't support an increase in tax. But this increase in the transient lodging tax would still be very minimal. It would be in the whole US, Oregon's transient lodging tax would still remain the third lowest. You can see in that top graph, we have, state lodging taxes of a number of states highlighted. You can see Oregon's way at the bottom there, less than 2%. Some states have much higher state lodging taxes. And another, important point here is that most of the revenue generated from this tax would be from out-of-state visitors. It's estimated that over 60% would come from people to visit our state and spending revenue that way. And, finally, there was an independent economic assessment done on this bill last legislative session, and it found like no correlation between a modest change in our tax to spending of visitors to our state. And to just illustrate that, you can look at that graph on the bottom, and I know like the bottom part of that graph is cut off, but basically the blue line that's going upwards is overnight visitor volume in the millions. So people are coming here and dramatically. And anyone that's driven on Highway 101 on the coast in the summertime knows that there's tons of traffic. There's tons of people coming to Oregon to enjoy our amazing wildlife and habitats. And then on the bottom, you can't see it too well here, but there's a green line that's basically the transient lodging tax. And you can see that when there's like little changes in transient lodging tax, it goes up a little bit. It has no impact on visitation to Oregon. That big line that you see going down in the year 2020 is from COVID. That's when people weren't coming here much because of COVID. But otherwise, we've seen rapid growth and we see rapid continual visitation in Oregon from visitors. We'll go ahead to the next slide, Brody. And finally, I just want to, talk about Bird Alliance of Oregon's former conservation director, Bob Salinger, who spent many years with our organization and many years trying to champion a lot of the work that this bill would prop up. And, Bob spent, like 15 years or more trying to get funding stream in Oregon to help protect non-game wildlife in particular. And most of the species identified in the State Wildlife Action Plan are non-game wildlife species. And, he tried things like a bird seed tax to a tire tax to a bottle cap tax. And now we have a really good chance to pass it with the 1% for wildlife. So also, Bob had spent years working with others to try to create a wildlife coexistence program at Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and he was one of the people really instrumental in forming getting Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife to form a task force several years ago to really, you know, to grapple with that. And the outcome of that task force was that ODFW found there was a need that we do need to create a program in Oregon as people keep coming to Oregon to figure out the best ways to resolve in a non-lethal way wildlife interactions and conflict with people. So with that, I think I'm done with my part of the talk. I'm going to pass it to back to Brody and he'll introduce Travis.
Thanks so much, Joe. For everybody listening at home, I know there's a lot of information there. That's why we've got the Q&A coming up at the end. So feel free to put any questions you have in there so we can make sure to chat about those. And with that, I do want to introduce Travis Coons, or let you introduce yourself, and you can tell us about how this bill will help with wildlife hospitals and what wildlife hospitals are.
Thank you so much, Brody, and great job, Joe. Yeah, the 1% tax is going to have that carve out that Joe mentioned. Brody, you can go to the next slide, and it's gonna be something that really supports the budgets for a variety. There's multiple care facilities around the state. Um, here at the Bird Alliance of Oregon, we maintain the oldest wildlife hospital. Really, wildlife rehabilitation's been happening at our wildlife sanctuary since the beginning, 1902, with William Finley and Irene Finley was already working with some birds in the forest to help to rehabilitate injured songbirds, and it's continued to this day. Now we've seen over 5,600 animals so far in our hospital here at Portland. And that's just for areas kind of north of Corvallis and into Southwest Washington. There's another facility out on the coast in Astoria, Bend, Pendleton. So there's some support across the state for the general public when they want to have a place they encounter wildlife that's ill, injured, um, or orphaned, and they're able to have some place to bring that to. We also have solutions counselors, and that is really like the leading edge of our public outreach. What we want to be doing is taking a proactive approach with this, and so we're out there talking with folks about what brings animals to our hospital, whether it's birds or mammals. About 20% of that 5,600 number comes from interactions, in particular with cats, typically with the songbirds. Another 20% is glass collisions, and then vehicle collisions are about 13% of the data that we see. So just those three items are about 50% of the reasons that the patients are coming in. So we work to support programs such as Cat Safe at Home, Lights Out Portland, to ensure that we're continuing to educate and have a proactive approach. Our permitting only allows us to treat native species. And also, we are not able to charge for this. So we run on a slim budget. I mentioned that we're the largest hospital in the state. Our budget's right around $600,000 a year, and that includes our staffing, our medical supplies, um, all of the different things that it takes to run a wildlife hospital. Not only are we a hospital, and there's the aspect of the rehabilitative care. So it takes flight conditioning pens of various sizes to get these animals stepwise back through release, whether it's a hawk, an eagle, an owl, or other songbirds. Um, it does support a lot of these the 300 plus animals on the list, but our major species are American crows, dark-eyed juncos, American robins. We see a wide variety of species. We've had 172 different species so far this year. Next slide. This is some more of our education that we are working on. So I mentioned Cat Safe at Home. The Bird Alliance of Oregon sponsors the Catio Tour here in Portland. We do a lot of support with the Feral Cat Coalition, and in particular, supporting the annual catio tours. There's around 12,000 catios just in the city of Portland. So um, it's something that we really support and will provide folks encouragement to have their cats some safe space outside. And what that'll do, it links up to a few things. We talk about urban coyotes and how they are here among us, and they've moved into Portland directly in the last 40 years or so, from out farther in the outskirts. And so the coyotes can take the cats if you're not keeping them safe, but the cats can take the birds if you're not keeping them inside. So we really try to tie everything together. You can see the imprint, the dusting on the window of that bird collision. And then habitat connectivity is something that we really support through our backyard habitat programs, that I think a lot of people are familiar with from the bird lines. On the next slide, we have another picture of Bob Salinger, from back at his time at the Wildlife Care Center. He was had a tremendous impact on our hospital for a long time. He also helped to find other wildlife rehabilitation centers, particularly the one in Bend. Bob was instrumental in this, and so I wanted to make sure we included this picture here of him. I think it's pretty neat working on the red tail. It's a mix of funding streams that we see. This additional infusion into our budget is going to be massive. I mentioned the size of it; it's not large. The other facilities are smaller than us in budget, and so we do rely on individual donations on a large scale, also grants and some corporate donations. But really, to this point, we don't have a ton of support other than we work with ODF&W and they provide our permitting. On the next slide, again, the Wildlife Corridor Action Plan is the slice that ODF&W and Joe mentioned, or maybe it was Brody. The ODOT is more in charge of the actual um, the large overpasses or the wildlife habitat corridors that you think of, but this is that working to um, continue to support habitat and that growth and that natural connectivity that allows green spaces for animals to move through, which is why we have so many coyotes among us. On the next slide, I want to finish up with this is a picture of a peregrine falcon that was rehabilitated in our hospital. He was found just on the banks of the river in Tom McCall Park. So, in particular, the permitting for wildlife rehabilitation, once they go through our process, this animal was in the hospital for approximately 48 days. Once they go through that full rehabilitation process, they're actually released as close to where they were found as possible. So we're able to get this cool picture with the hawthorn in the back. These new biologist positions that were mentioned is something that we will really rely on. We currently are on the phone with ODF&W fairly often. They're a huge partner with what we do, whether we're sending waterfowl that may be suspected HPAI, which is the avian influenza, the bird flu that you may have heard of. There's a lot of support that that'll do, but I also wanted to highlight the environmental justice aspect of this, because they'll be able to more actively engage with vulnerable communities and work to ensure that equitable access and help involve folks that have maybe not been in that decision-making process, actually have that opportunity. So that's something that I think is something we should all be getting behind as well. Um, Brody, are you going to hand it off to Carly or should I? Brody, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Travis, for all of that. And yeah, to end up, we are going to hear from Carly Chin about how you can get involved in this process. And Carly, if you want to introduce yourself, I'll hand it off to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe and Travis and Brody. Hello, everyone. My name is Carly Chin, and I'm the Advocacy Program Coordinator at the Bird Alliance of Oregon. Really excited to be here tonight. Thus far, we've heard from Joe and Travis why this bill is so important for wildlife conservation. And so now I'm going to turn the topic to next steps, action, and how you can all be a part of this journey. So you might be wondering, what can I do to help get this bill passed? And the answer is there's a lot. So I'm going to speak about the journey that this bill now faces to be passed into law, and then kind of highlight the areas where you can plug into this journey. So, first, it's super helpful to understand what playing field we're working with. And in this case, the playing field is the Oregon legislature. So, if you're unfamiliar with how our state government works, here's a quick overview. Right, we're in the legislative branch and we have two sections. We have a Senate and a House of Representatives. The Senate has 30 senators that serve 4-year terms. Currently, we've got a Democratic majority in the Senate. And the Senate is led by Rob Wagner, who's a Democrat. On the House, we have 60 state representatives who serve 2-year terms. The House also has a Democratic majority, and is led by Julie Fahey, who is also a Democrat. So every year, the legislature has a legislative session, which is kind of the active time in which bills are being proposed and voted on and passed into law. So the years alternate between short and long sessions. And so this upcoming session in 2026 will be a short session, which means it lasts about 1 month. It'll kick off on February 2nd and then conclude on March 8th. So it's pretty quick. And because the session is so short, we are going to be focusing on just one bill, which is 1% for wildlife. And in comparison, during the last legislative session, we were focusing on 8 bills. So this next session, we're really, really, putting all of our energy towards uplifting 1% for wildlife. Last year, 1% for wildlife got really close to passing, but ultimately fell short. And so this year, we're really excited to bring it back and try again. Next slide. So now it's time for a little bit of a history lesson. I'll talk about what happened last year with the bill, plus wrap that into like a little government 101. How does a bill become a law? So a bill, yeah, understanding the pathway will be helpful for us to know how and when we as advocates can influence this process. So a bill can be introduced through either the House or the Senate. Last year, 1% for Wildlife was formerly called HB 2977, and it was introduced through the House. And a bill has to pass both the House and the Senate before it goes to the governor's desk to be signed into law. But it's not a straight shot from the House to the Senate. To get through the House, the bill first has to pass through a variety of committees. So we can kind of trace the journey of HB 2977 from last year. So HB 2977 was introduced on the House, in the House side. It lands in the Agriculture, Land Use, Natural Resources, and Water Committee. In this committee, it's voted on and it passes 6-3. That's great. It moves on to the next committee, the Revenue Committee, where it passes 6-1. Also great. Now it's in the House floor where all 60 House representatives are voting on it. It also passes the House floor with a pretty comfortable margin, 36-15, which is super exciting. So now it's across on the other side in the Senate, where it lands in the Rules Committee. And this is where it got bogged down last year. In the very final days of session, Republicans filed a minority report, which is basically a procedural trick that successfully delayed the bill until the end of session. So essentially, we just ran out of time, and we weren't able to get the bill to the next step before the legislative session ended. So how do we all fit into this picture, right? We're not legislators and we don't get to directly vote on these bills. So how can we influence the process? As you'll see, the bill needs to pass through a variety of committees. And at each juncture, the bill needs votes from legislators who represent their constituents, which are all of you here. So legislators work for you, and they're supposed to represent you and your interests. So one of the best things you can do is to contact your legislators to ensure that they understand how important 1% for wildlife is to their constituents. So there's two main ways to get in touch with your legislators. The first one is you can just call them. You can find their office phone on the Oregon Legislature website, and you can just call them and tell them, why 1% for wildlife is important to you. If you're like me and a phone call sounds intimidating to you, you can also write them. So, Bird Alliance of Oregon actually just released an action alert calling on people to write to their legislators to ask them to support 1% for wildlife. We're at this, we're the legislative session is just a few months away, so we really want to start intensifying our advocacy efforts and apply stronger and stronger pressure. So by the time that the session starts in February, legislators have 1% for wildlife just drilled into their minds, and they know without a doubt that their constituents are excited about this bill and talking about this bill and really support this bill. So, in these letters, you can tell them why wildlife is important to you, why you support it. There's a lot of reasons to choose from. You'll recall Joe talking about the state of Oregon's wildlife. We have no stable funding source for our wildlife. We have economic analyses that show how important wildlife is to our economy and that most of the tax burden will fall on out-of-state travelers. Travis has been telling us how, the important work that wildlife care centers do and how our own wildlife care center at Bird Alliance of Oregon would directly benefit from this bill. There's so many reasons, and you can take the angle that resonates with you. And now, if this is your first time writing to legislators, we have detailed talking points on what to include. You don't have to have this whole presentation memorized. Don't worry, we make it super easy. The easiest way to get in touch with your legislator and send them an email is to scan this QR code, and it'll take you to our template that has all of our main talking points laid out. So I want to reiterate that legislators represent you. It is always within your right to reach out to them and tell them what's important to you, regardless of whether, we are in the middle of a targeted campaign, right? Our action alerts tell you when there are particularly critical times to contact representatives, but you are always free to contact them. Next slide. Another action you can do is just to show up in person. We're hosting a Wildlife Action Day on February 4th in Salem outside the Capitol. And this is a chance to use your literal voice to speak up for the bill. So we're going to gather outside the Capitol, where we'll rally and cheer and chant and have the opportunity to meet fellow wildlife lovers. We'll have signs and art and t-shirts. And really the idea here is that we want to demonstrate, visually a really strong show of support for 1% for wildlife. Afterwards, there'll be an options to meet with your legislators. And then just generally, it's a great way to build camaraderie around wildlife conservation and meet other wildlife lovers. Next slide. So there are a few upcoming events I'd like to highlight for you all. January 27th is our art party co-hosted with Oregon Wild. So this is kind of the prep party for the Wildlife Action Day. We're going to be meeting and creating signs, making art to bring with us to the rally. And then, yeah, February 4th is the big one. That's our Wildlife Action Day. I'll be sending out, or Bird Alliance of Oregon will be sending out, more detailed event announcements later. But for now, you can save the date and register. And then finally, just in general, it's always a great idea to sign up for our action alerts to make sure that you stay up to date on all of our conservation issues. And I'll conclude just by saying that this bill is really exciting. It gained a lot of momentum last year, and we're going to need all of you to help us keep it moving along. So we hope that you'll plug into this advocacy wherever you can, whether that's writing a letter to your legislator, telling your friends, or coming down to Salem with us on February 4th. And, whatever flavor works for you, we just hope that you'll join us in this fight to get this historic opportunity for Oregon's wildlife secured. And with that, I will turn it back over to Brody to close this out.
Thank you so much, Carly. And thank you, Joe. And thank you, Travis. Thank you all for being here and staying until the end. Congratulations to all of you for staying to your time so well. That's great. Yeah, we've got some time for questions, and we've got a few questions already in the Q&A. That should be at the bottom of your screen. If you're not able to find it, you can throw it in the chat. We'll monitor that as well. There's one other way to do it too, which is to raise your hand, and we can unmute you to be able to ask a question over the air. And I see that we actually have one raised hand, I believe. Oh, maybe they lowered their hand. So we've got a few questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to read those out to you all, and then you can scrap over who wants to answer these. We'll start with the first question is from Debbie. Is there a part of this bill that funds responding to larger scale environmental emergencies that impact wildlife? Maybe Joe, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, Debbie, I'm not sure 100% what you mean, so feel free to chime in vocally if you'd like. But I think, we I think, funding the implementation of the State Wildlife Action Plan is a huge, large-scale environmental emergency because it addresses our biodiversity crisis here in Oregon. So I would point to that, although I'm not 100% sure if maybe there's something more you're getting at in your question. So feel free to type again or chime in, and I can try to be helpful.
Thanks, Joe.
Mhm.
Next question is from Marion, who asks, which legislator is going to reintroduce the bill in state Senate and House? Do we know that? Are we allowed to say that?
Yeah, it's Representative Helm who introduced it last session. And last session you can go online and see, there are a number of sponsors to the bill, including, on the Republican side, Representative Owens from Eastern Oregon, Senator Lou Frederick from here in Portland, Democrat, and also Senator Nash, another Republican, Senator Gorsuch, a Democrat. So it definitely has good bipartisan support. We expect those same legislators to support it once again this session.
Yeah, and I think possibly the more legislators that hear that this is really important to their constituents might be more that want to co-sponsor the bill. There's a great question from Vaibhav who says, how do we ensure that the bill does not get stalled again?
I can try to take a stab at that. There's no guarantee, I think, um, things can happen in the legislative session and politics can play out in ways that you can't expect. So, our main concern is really focusing on the Senate because it passed pretty easily, as you saw from Carly's slide, through the House. And, we need to be vigilant everywhere. We need to be vigilant with the House members as well. But I think, we're putting a lot of our effort right now is working on talking to the Senate, individual legislators, especially those that we're not sure of their position or maybe against it, um, and trying to change their mind or firm up their support. So that's the best we can do. And having your response to our action alerts and coming to these events, the more, like Carly said before, the more we can drill into everyone's heads and legislature that we really want you to pass this, the more likely it will get through.
And just getting back to Debbie's previous question, Debbie said that they were thinking about something like the Klamath Basin botulism event.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Travis might, that's a good example of something that maybe would be something that a care center could prepare themselves for, with funding from a bill like this. I could see if we had some funding for some of more rural care centers, they may have more resources to address emergencies like this. So maybe Travis might have something to say.
The care center, or even more with just broadly within organizations, able to support various certifications like HAZWOPER, for example, where you're working on oiled and injured wildlife with often an emphasis on oiled seabirds. Um, and so I think that there is also, it's always great if you have more staff biologists that also may be able to report and relocate to help support wherever it's needed. Um, and then, yeah, it will be a trickle down when there's depending on who, where these events hit, whether it's um, something like this mentioned in the chat or other large scale wildfire or oil spills or et cetera. Those hospitals that are in that area are going to be really key and being able to provide a adequate response to all of those affected animals.
Thanks, Travis. Um, from over in the chat, we've got a few questions, folks. This is great. Keep them coming. I appreciate that. From over in the chat, there's a question from Deanne. For the next legislative session, will the work on this bill start where the last session left off, or does the whole process have to start over again? Carly, since you were talking about that process, do you want to jump in there and
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, each legislative session starts from the beginning. But I will say, from an advocacy point of view, it was super helpful that last session we already gained a lot of momentum and visibility around this bill, so that carries over for sure, from an advocacy point of view. But yeah, from a legislative session point of view, it does restart.
thank you? Another question from the chat that I think is important, and I know it's one that we've been talking a lot about. Do the budget deficit worries, or maybe a better question is, how do the budget deficit worries cause some legislators to think twice?
Yeah, I think I can try to go for that one. Well, as you know, a lot of federal funding to the state of Oregon has been cut or is on the chopping block. About a third of Oregon state budget comes from the federal government. And so when you take away money from one program, and it could be completely separate from natural resources, then there's backfilling that is going to happen potentially to make up for that. So there is a lot of concern right now. We were in November a couple weeks ago. A lot of us were in Salem to talk to legislators, and there's a lot of concern because we are in a budget deficit right now. What I would say is that the the 1% for wildlife would generate state money. We wouldn't be dependent on federal money. So in the climate we're in right now, where we're really concerned about federal money not making it to the state where it has historically, we need to generate our own revenue, and this is one perfect way to do it. Um, I think also there is always concern about raising taxes, and you can't get away from that. But again, this tax, as we've said, it would not have a significant impact on visitation in Oregon. People are going to spend a few more dollars to stay in a hotel, to enjoy Haystack Rock and see the puffins there and all those things like that.
And there's a few other questions, but one that is sort of an add-on to that, Joe, um, is isn't the bill budget neutral as the money it uses is generated by the raise in tax? Sort of that delineating a fiscal ask versus a separate tax that is paying for the project.
Can you say that again? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Yeah, isn't this bill Vaibhav is asking, isn't this bill
Yeah,
budget
okay,
neutral?
now I see it. Yeah, I see it now. Yes. Uh, this bill generates money. It would generate money. So doesn't create a fiscal ask on the legislature. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Um, some more great questions. So Katie says the Alaka Alliance is working to set up some letter writing parties around the state. Do you have any flyers or materials that we could display or hand out? Carly, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, we have lots, and I'm happy to share. I think maybe. We're gonna send out well, I'll put my email in the chat here for everyone. If anyone else has follow-up questions as well, feel free to reach out. And then also, I think we're planning on sending out like a follow-up email after this with just like the link to this recording, as well as links to sign up in case you missed it in the chat. And I'll have my email included in that as well. So reaching out to me through that email would be a great way to get some of the materials that we have. We do have a lot of materials and we're happy to share.
Carly, I'm going to add a quick add-on to that question. We mentioned that our current action alert is asking people to contact their legislators by December 19th. This is going to be recorded and posted on our website so that folks can watch it later. If it's after December 19th, are there still opportunities for folks to contact their legislators and all of that?
Yeah, I would say if you miss the deadline, it's not a hard deadline, so aim to, get them in by December 19th, but But if you can't make that deadline, it's still very helpful and useful for you to submit those letters.
Thank you. Um, a quick question. Does the bill have a House number yet?
No, it does not. It won't get assigned that until January.
Thanks. And another great question from Jenny is, are Metro and the legislators in the Metro area supportive of 1%? And if not, how can we encourage them to be supportive?
Yeah, I can try to take that one. Yes, legislators in the metro area, by and large, are supportive of this bill. I think you can look. I'm looking at, Senator Lou Frederick was a sponsor of the bill. Senator Gamba down in Milwaukee was a sponsor as well. Rep. Pham or Senator Pham now, in the Portland metro area, was supportive. The Metro itself, the government, uh, it was not supportive of it last year. And we are working on trying to make them at least neutral. And I think it had to do with just a tax increase that they felt would impact them in some ways. But again, there will be opportunities, and we're actually going to be um, figuring out ways to work with Metro on that. And, I think for now, it'll be one-on-one engagement with um, Metro counselors to urge them to be at least neutral on the bill, and, highlight that Portland Metro, operates the zoo, and the zoo would benefit, and their mission would be part of trying to recover our wildlife in Oregon. So I think we'll make some of those things really clear, and stay tuned for further potential ways to engage with Metro as well.
Yeah, back in 2021, the zoo came out in support of the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, which is a federal bill that would fund wildlife recovery. So I think it would be good for them to be consistent and support this bill, or at least not stand against it. Um, well, folks, we are dangerously close to ending on time. Again, I want to thank all of our panelists. We'll be sending out a recording of this tomorrow with more resources. And if you have any questions, Carly's email is there, or you can email back to the address that you got this link from. So I really appreciate all of you being here, being engaged, asking such great questions. We're really looking forward to working with you to help get this passed in the next legislative session. All right. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks so much. Thanks for all the kind words, and we'll see you out there soon. Good night, everybody.